When you think about space exploration today, what truly comes to mind? Is it the dazzling rockets lifting off, streaking across the sky with a roar that shakes the ground?
Yeah, that image is powerful.
Or is it the incredible pace of innovation, new technologies emerging almost daily, really pushing the boundaries of what we thought possible?
Definitely seeing a lot of that lately.
Or perhaps it's that age-old, deeply human dream of humanity reaching for the stars, extending our reach beyond Earth. It's all of that. Absolutely the wonder, the ambition, the sheer spectacle.
For sure.
But beneath these incredible technological advancements and the sheer audacity of it all, there's a less discussed, yet equally crucial aspect that's looming larger than ever over this new era of cosmic adventure: the profound ethical questions.
You've hit on it perfectly. We're witnessing a truly radical realignment in how we engage with space. For decades, it felt like a distant government-driven endeavor.
Right, like something NASA did or the Russians.
Exactly. Now, the landscape has fundamentally shifted. It's no longer just about national prestige or scientific discovery from a few state agencies. Private corporations are not merely participating, they're often leading the charge, bringing entirely new motivations, different priorities, and, well, consequently, a whole new set of challenges to the forefront.
And that's precisely what we're going to dive deep into today. Our mission is to unpack ethical considerations for the age of non-governmental space exploration. This isn't just about the engineering marvels that launch us off the planet. It touches on everything from protecting the delicate orbital environment we rely on to the fundamental question of who actually benefits from what's increasingly looking like a cosmic gold rush.
Yeah, who gets to cash in, basically?
It's about shaping the future of humanity's expansion beyond Earth in a way that is not really technologically advanced, but also fair, sustainable, and ethically sound for everyone.
To help us navigate this incredibly complex terrain, we've pulled together a fascinating stack of sources for this deep dive. We're looking at insights gleaned from a lively Reddit discussion that captures public sentiment, some really in-depth academic papers from prestigious journals like Nature and Semantic Scholar that provide rigorous analysis,
Okay.
foundational UN treaties and declarations that set the international legal stage, and insightful analyses from platforms like Viterbi Conversations in Ethics and Cosmo BC Astroblog.
It's a real mix of sources.
A real mix, yeah. Our goal is to help you understand the multifaceted, often conflicting viewpoints on how we can ensure humanity's expansion into space truly serves the common good and, well, avoids repeating past mistakes here on Earth.
Let's start by laying the historical groundwork, because it truly is the foundation of everything we're discussing today. For decades, space exploration was almost exclusively a government-led endeavor. We're talking about the Cold War era, where the push into space was primarily driven by national security interests, the race to achieve technological superiority, and, let's be honest, a massive global prestige race.
It was all about beating the other side.
Exactly. Think about the Apollo program, the Mercury program. These were projects of such grand scale, requiring immense financial and logistical resources that only public agencies like NASA or the Soviet space program could really lead them.
That's absolutely right. In those early years, the immediate, overwhelming challenge was simply getting into space. It was an unprecedented engineering feat.
Just getting off the ground.
Yeah, and that monumental task overshadowed almost everything else, including most environmental considerations. There was a pragmatic sense that you couldn't really worry about space debris when you were still figuring out how to get a human into orbit safely.
Makes sense. First things first.
It was also a time when the diversity of entities involved was very limited, largely just the US and Russia, occasionally working through proxy states. This certainly made regulations simpler, if not always easy, especially with the intense geopolitical motivations driving everything.
The fewer players on the board.
Exactly. The initial military backdrop also shaped a core belief, a fundamental assumption of the compliance of the traveler with the internal discipline of the crew and the mission. This was an ethos carried over directly from military test pilots who were highly disciplined and understood the inherent risks and chain of command. You knew they'd follow orders.
You could almost picture it, right?
Yeah.
The sheer scale and power of an iconic Saturn V rocket manufactured by industrial giants like Boeing or the United Launch Alliance ULA, which was formed by Boeing and Lockheed Martin.
Right, the big established players.
These were the behemoths that traditionally supported those massive government projects, providing the hardware for missions driven by national objectives. This established what you could call a space for Earth ideology.
Space serving Earth's needs.
Precisely. The ultimate goal wasn't just to get to space. It was to use space to improve life back here on Earth. Whether it was communications satellites revolutionizing global connectivity, weather satellites enhancing forecasting, or reconnaissance satellites providing critical security information.
All tangible benefits back home.
Yeah, space was viewed as a powerful tool, a means to an end, a new frontier to ultimately benefit our planet.
And that framework, that space for Earth mindset, held for decades, guiding policy and investment. But then, as we moved into the 2010s, something fundamental shifted.
Like at that turning point.
Yeah, this decade truly ushered in a radical realignment, a new commercially focused space age that changed the entire dynamic of who goes to space, why they go, and what they plan to do there. It wasn't just incremental change, it was a paradigm shift.
And this is where the picture really starts to shift dramatically, opening up a whole new set of questions.
Mm-hmm.
The past decade has shown us something truly unprecedented in space exploration, and it's overwhelmingly due to the rapid rise of private corporations.
No question about it.
Companies like Space Exploration Technologies Corporation, SpaceX, of course, Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, they're household names now, not just for their ambitious plans, but for their tangible achievements.
They're actually doing it.
But it's not just about launching people or satellites into orbit for government contracts. We've also seen the emergence of innovative startups like Planetary Resources, Inc., and Deep Space Industries, which, though they've pivoted or closed since, began with incredibly ambitious goals, like kickstarting entire industries specifically dedicated to space mining, extracting resources from asteroids or the moon.
That whole idea was revolutionary at the time. This truly represents a profound shift, moving from that space for Earth ideology we just discussed to what's being called a space for space paradigm.
Okay, space for space. Explain that a bit more.
Well, this new vision isn't primarily about using space to improve Earth life, at least not directly or exclusively. Instead, it aims to create an independent economic system, entirely detached from existing terrestrial markets, specifically designed to serve and sustain life in space.
An economy in space for space activities.
Exactly. This means profit and capitalization are now central motivators for space activity, not just national interest or pure scientific discovery. The very purpose of venturing into the cosmos is fundamentally changing.
So what does this all mean for humanity when the primary drivers for space exploration become commercial gain and the establishment of extraterrestrial economies? It's a huge, almost philosophical question, isn't it?
It really is.
How might this fundamentally change our relationship with space itself, moving from a frontier of pure discovery, a place for scientific awe and wonder, to, well, a marketplace of resources where every celestial body is viewed through the lens of its potential for exploitation?
That's the core tension. It suggests a potential shift from exploring for knowledge to exploiting for profit.
And we see this happening already.
Precisely. To give you some concrete examples, SpaceX made history as the first private company to send humans to space, and back in May 2020, followed swiftly by Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic with their suborbital flights.
Huge milestones.
Huge. These companies are consistently lauded for achieving more with often smaller budgets and significantly quicker turnaround times compared to traditional government agencies like NASA. It's very much the Silicon Valley model applied to space.
Move fast, break things. Oh, hopefully not literally in space.
Oh, yeah, that's the worry. But it's prioritizing rapid innovation, iterative development, and aggressive growth, all fueled by private investment and a drive for market expansion. This efficiency is undeniable, but it also prompts us to consider the underlying values and, crucially, the ethical guardrails that guide this rapid progress.
It's truly remarkable to watch the speed at which these companies operate and innovate. But this new, commercially vibrant yet largely unregulated landscape immediately brings up critical ethical considerations.
Absolutely.
And we have to start with one of the most immediate and tangible impacts: our footprint on the space environment itself. It's definitely not the pristine wilderness we might imagine to be anymore.
That's a critical point that can't be overstated. The sheer volume of commercial launches we're seeing, many of them carrying multiple payloads, sometimes dozens or even hundreds of small satellites at once, means Earth's orbit is becoming ever more congested.
Like a cosmic traffic jam.
Exactly. Think about it like a highway that's getting more and more traffic. The worry is that if this proliferation of debris goes unchecked, if these collisions continue, it could lead to a cascading domino effect known as the Kessler syndrome.
Ah, yes, the Kessler syndrome. Sounds ominous.
It is. This scenario, named after NASA scientist Donald Kessler, posits that once a certain density of objects is reached in orbit, any collision generates more debris, which then causes more collisions, creating a self-sustaining chain reaction.
A runaway effect.
Ultimately, this could render parts of Earth's orbit completely unusable, making access to space incredibly dangerous, if not impossible, and higher orbits virtually inaccessible. It basically closes off space.
And then this isn't just some theoretical science fiction nightmare for a movie script, is it?
Not at all. The reality of space debris has been starkly demonstrated through actual events. The orbital commons, that vast shared space around Earth that was once viewed as this limitless natural resource, is quite literally being consumed and despoiled by self-interested actors.
The tragedy of the commons. But in space.
It's a classic parallel, yes. Individual users act in their own self-interest, depleting or damaging a shared resource, ultimately to everyone's detriment. The initial pioneering spirit of space exploration, while admirable and necessary, simply didn't account for this cumulative environmental impact, focusing instead on reaching the next frontier.
Were there specific incidents that highlighted this?
We've had a few unmistakable wake-up calls. Consider the Cerise incident in 1996, for instance, where a fragment from an exploded Ariane rocket actually hit an operational French military satellite.
Oh, okay.
That really brought the threat into sharp relief for the spacefaring community, demonstrating that even a tiny piece of debris moving at orbital velocities could cause significant damage.
And that wasn't the only one, right?
No, even more dramatically, in 2009, an inactive Russian military satellite, Cosmos 2251, collided with an active U.S. commercial satellite, Iridium-33.
Two whole satellites colliding.
Yeah. That single event alone produced nearly 2,000 pieces of trackable debris larger than 10 centimeters in diameter and countless smaller pieces. And closer to home, or rather looking up from home, concerns are already growing about the impact of large constellations like Starlink.
The internet satellites.
Exactly, putting thousands of satellites into orbit. Astronomers are really worried about their impact on ground-based astronomy. These satellites reflect sunlight, creating streaks across telescope images and making scientific observation, particularly of faint objects, much harder, fundamentally altering our view of the night sky.
So for you, the listener, this isn't just about abstract orbital mechanics or blurry telescope images. This growing amount of debris poses a tangible threat to services we rely on every single day, often without even realizing it.
Absolutely. Think about it. Accurate GPS navigation for your car or phone, timely weather forecasting that helps you plan your day, global telecommunications that connect you to friends, family, and work around the world.
All satellite dependent.
All of these modern conveniences, so deeply integrated into our lives, rely on a clear and accessible orbital environment. If that environment becomes choked with debris and unusable, the impact on daily life would be truly profound. It's not just about space anymore, it's about life here on Earth and the critical infrastructure that supports it.
That really brings it home.
And our environmental footprint isn't limited to Earth's immediate vicinity. As humanity ventures further, with missions increasingly targeting other celestial bodies, the conversation broadens, raising entirely new questions about preservation and stewardship beyond our own planet.
This is where the concept of planetary protection comes in. It's something that often sparks really interesting debates, doesn't it?
It really does. As human missions increasingly venture to other planets and celestial bodies like Mars or maybe Jupiter's moon Europa, there's a growing awareness of the potential damage to what are called scientifically significant environments.
Places that might hold clues about life or the universe's history.
Exactly. These are places where unique geological formations exist, or, crucially, where potential signs of extraterrestrial life, however microbial, might be found. This growing awareness is what led COSPAR, which is the Committee on Space Research, an international scientific committee that advises governments and organizations on space research, to introduce planetary protection measures.
So COSPAR sets the guidelines.
They play a crucial role, yeah. They act as a key authority on how to ethically explore space without contaminating other celestial bodies, protecting them from Earth-based microbes, and also protecting Earth from anything potentially harmful coming back. Forward and backward contamination.
But hasn't the focus often been elsewhere?
Historically, yes. The focus of space ethics often centered more on the resources to be gained from other planets or the viability of terraforming them to make them habitable for humans. There was far less emphasis on the outward impact of humanity itself, on what we might do to the pristine environments we encounter.
Like an oversight.
You could say that. It really highlights a historical, environmental illiteracy and self-interest that fueled early space exploration, driven by an almost limitless frontier mentality. The debate today is incredibly complex, trying to balance the undeniable scientific progress and human ambition with the ethical need for preservation, even if the life we might discover proves to be solely microbial.
So even finding just microbes raises ethical questions.
Big ones. The question becomes, do we have a right to fundamentally alter these environments, even if our intentions are to make them habitable for us or extract resources? Do we potentially wipe out unique native life before we even understand it?
It makes you think deeply about discussions around lunar industrialization, like the process of welding or constructing habitats on the moon.
Yeah, that's a good example.
While the moon certainly lacks an atmosphere or a biosphere, and therefore won't experience the same environmental effects as Earth, from increased industrial activity, you won't have air pollution in the same way. The question remains, is it truly environmentally harmless to drastically alter a celestial body's natural state?
Right. Does harmless just mean doesn't affect Earth?
What does it mean to build massive structures or mine resources on a world that has been untouched by human industry for billions of years? And even more uncomfortably, the idea of extracting water from space, from lunar ice or asteroids, to supplement Earth's supply.
That raises some eyebrows.
It raises questions about what some are calling a parasitic side to humanity. It suggests we might be looking to outer space as a quick fix, a new resource pool to remedy human-generated environmental problems here on Earth, rather than focusing first and foremost on healing the detrimental impacts we've already caused on our own planet.
Kind of like strip mining the solar system instead of cleaning up our own mess. So this is a fundamental challenge we face. If we don't establish robust ethical guidelines and a shared philosophy now, before we deeply entrench commercial interests, are we doomed to simply export Earth's environmental problems, our resource depletion, our pollution, our tragedy of the commons mentality to new celestial frontiers?
Are we just going to make the same mistakes elsewhere?
What are the long-term consequences of viewing other planets solely as resource banks, rather than unique, scientifically invaluable environments worthy of preservation for their own sake? This is a question about our values as a species and how we choose to define our role in the cosmos.
The environment, both orbital and beyond, is certainly one massive facet of this conversation demanding our attention. But just as crucial is the human element, the very people venturing into this new frontier.
Absolutely.
What are the ethical considerations surrounding their safety, their well-being, and how they're treated in what is still fundamentally an incredibly high-risk environment?
Indeed. A paper we consulted from Nature specifically addresses the critical bioethical issues related to private spaceflight. These include the significant and often unique health risks for spaceflight occupants, the appropriateness of health-based criteria for selecting who gets to go to space, and crucial ethical issues regarding research on human subjects in spaceflight, especially as more diverse individuals undertake these journeys.
It's really important to note that this paper deliberately uses the term spaceflight occupants, which is much broader than just astronauts. Why is that distinction important?
Well, it's a key distinction because it expands the scope of ethical responsibility beyond highly trained professionals employed by governments to include, crucially, space tourists and private citizens.
People just buying a ticket.
Exactly. While a common yet ethically challenged sentiment used to be that all astronauts are guinea pigs, they know it, agree to it, and get paid for it, ethical standards in modern medicine and research clearly dictate that there are limits to the conditions you can ethically put people under, even if you're paying them handsomely.
Consent isn't a blank check.
Right. Consent must be truly informed, risks must be minimized as much as possible, and dignity must be maintained.
This point about occupants versus astronauts points directly to the rigorous selection processes historically used for government astronauts.
Those were incredibly strict.
Not just physically and psychologically demanding, but also to ensure the compliance of the crew with mission directives and safety protocols.
Yes, they were essentially military or quasi-military operations. But with the anticipated expansion of human space activity and different types of occupants, not just government-trained professionals, but wealthy individuals paying for a ride, this level of inherent compliance and the assumption of exhaustive training can no longer be taken for granted.
You can't assume a tourist will react like a test pilot.
Pretty much. Think about the ethical considerations in medical research here on Earth. When is consent truly informed? Especially when you're talking about extremely high-risk, novel environments like space, where not all risks are fully understood or mitigable. The line between adventure and exploitation can become very thin if not carefully managed.
And these questions of health and selection lead directly to a truly critical issue: safety standards, especially for a burgeoning industry that's increasingly catering to paying clients, not just highly vetted government employees.
This is a major area of concern because currently there are little to no dedicated regulations on space tourism.
Really? That seems surprising.
Well, some national agencies might have oversight for public safety on launches, making sure the rocket doesn't endanger people on the ground. But there is a significant vacuum regarding the in-flight experience and long-term health monitoring for private passengers. This raises reasonable concern that private space tourist companies might cut corners that could harm or endanger their clients, as they aren't bound by the same stringent, decades-old safety rules and oversight protocols as government agencies like NASA.
The pressure to turn a profit might compromise safety.
That's the fear. The commercial imperative to reduce costs and increase launch frequency could, hypothetically, come at the expense of safety margins.
There's a really clear divide in perspectives on regulation here, and it's a fascinating ethical dilemma, isn't it?
Absolutely.
One view suggests that for wealthy space tourists who, let's be honest, have the resources to verify the safety of their tour, they can afford their own lawyers and technical consultants. It simply becomes a buyer beware situation.
Caveat emptor in space.
Right. At some point, this argument posits its personal responsibility. If you're rich enough to buy a ticket to space, you're expected to do your extensive due diligence, understand the risks, and accept the consequences. It's an extreme sport for the ultra-wealthy.
Conversely, a very strong counterargument is that it's exactly the right time to create restrictions before abuses happen, not after a disaster tragically kills people.
Regulate proactively, not reactively.
Exactly. This highlights the inherent tension between promoting rapid innovation, which private companies excel at, and ensuring fundamental public safety in a novel industry that impacts human life. Industry arguments often state that your regulations won't prevent deaths, but will prevent space exploration, suggesting that without the practical experience gained through rapid development, regulators might be regulating the wrong things, stifling progress rather than ensuring safety.
That's a common argument against regulation in new fields.
It is. However, the potential for harm to human life and the potential for a catastrophic accident to derail the entire industry weighs heavily on the other side of the scale.
But then you have comments that push this buyer beware argument into a very uncomfortable ethical territory, like the stark comment from one source about Elon Musk openly discussing indentured servitude as a means to get people to Mars.
Yeah, that certainly raised some alarms.
While that's a hypothetical and perhaps extreme scenario, it truly underscores the potential for exploitation if ethical boundaries aren't clearly defined and enforced early in this new frontier.
Yeah.
It forces us to ask, how far can the buyer beware principle be stretched before it crosses into fundamental human rights violations, even for those who seemingly consent?
It's a troubling thought. This raises a fundamental question for us as a society. How do we balance the pioneering spirit of exploration and technological advancement, which is certainly exciting and visionary, with our fundamental ethical obligations to protect human life, even when individuals choose to engage in incredibly high-risk activities?
Where's that line?
Where do we draw the line between facilitating audacious dreams and ensuring basic human safety and dignity in the vacuum of space?
And these safety concerns, particularly as space becomes increasingly commercialized and privatized, intersect directly with broader questions of access and equity. So the essential question becomes, whose space is this, really?
Yeah.
Is it truly a common heritage for all? Or is it destined to become another exclusive domain?
That's the crux of it, and it touches on core issues of global justice. A significant ethical concern highlighted in our sources is that current space services, particularly space tourism, cater exclusively to the rich, serving only a narrow slice of humanity.
Just the billionaires and multimillionaires, basically.
That's how it looks right now, yeah. And this isn't just about who can afford a ticket. It's about who gets to participate in and benefit from this new era of cosmic expansion.
This model of space privatization directly contributes to and further reinforces the position of the rich, potentially widening the wealth gap that plagues the global population. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, you can see how the capitalist model, while it unquestionably fosters incredible technological innovation, what's been dubbed the Silicon Valley model, with its rapid development cycles and venture capital funding, also inherently tends towards wealth inequality. It concentrates resources and opportunities.
And that clashes with the original vision for space.
It contrasts sharply with a foundational principle enshrined in the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which states that space exploration should be for the benefit and in the interests of all countries, irrespective of their degree of economic or scientific development, and shall be the province of all mankind.
Province of all mankind.
Yeah.
That's a very idealistic, inclusive vision.
It is. The contrast is stark when you look at the reality. Consider what our sources refer to as the three space barons of the modern age. Jeff Bezos of Blue Origin, Richard Branson of Virgin Galactic, and Elon Musk of SpaceX.
The big three private players.
These are multi-billionaires, and their space voyages can cost figures like, well, $55 million for a trip to the space station, or several $100,000 for just a few minutes in suborbital space, easily more than the average U.S. home.
That puts it in perspective.
It powerfully illustrates how premier access to seemingly unlimited resources and this grand new frontier is primarily available to those who already possess most of Earth's wealth, further consolidating power and opportunity within a tiny elite.
So for you, the listener, if space becomes another exclusive playground for the ultra-wealthy, reserved for those who can afford the exorbitant price tags, what does that mean for the aspirational vision of space as humanity's collective frontier?
Does it live up to the promise?
Does it truly fulfill that promise of space for all mankind, or does it in fact betray it, turning a universal human dream into a luxury commodity?
And this global inequality in access and benefit is particularly acute for nations in the global south who, despite their often limited direct space capabilities, rely heavily on space-based technologies for fundamental development.
This is a truly critical area of discussion that often gets overlooked in the dazzling headlines about Mars colonies and tourist flights.
Absolutely. Space-based technologies are vital for the global south, playing an increasingly crucial role in areas like precision agriculture, where satellites help optimize crop yields, disaster management, providing early warnings for floods or droughts, and climate monitoring, tracking deforestation or ice melt that directly impacts their communities.
These aren't luxuries, they're essential tools.
They're absolutely crucial for addressing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which aim to tackle global challenges like poverty, hunger, and climate change. However, these nations often face unequal access to space, limited resources, and vulnerabilities when it comes to discussions and engagements regarding space security and sustainability, leaving them at a distinct disadvantage.
Have they tried to shape the rules?
Despite their historically limited involvement in early space exploration, countries from the global south have made significant contributions to space law, advocating tirelessly for equitable access and peaceful uses of outer space. For example, Latin American countries played a key role in drafting foundational space treaties, emphasizing inclusivity.
But they still face hurdles.
Yes, they continue to face immense challenges influencing multilateral space governance due to disparities in resources and representation. They also have highly skilled technical experts, but they lack the financial resources and political clout to connect this expertise effectively to their capitals and delegations for international negotiations. There's also often a clear disconnect between political decision-makers in these regions and the operational realities of space, hindering effective strategy development.
Can you give an example of these differing priorities?
Sure. To give you a specific, tangible example, consider Brazil's concern for strengthening space situational awareness, or SSA, capabilities. This highlights how their priorities might differ significantly from developed nations. While developed nations primarily focus on protecting their vast existing assets and managing traffic in what they perceive as an increasingly congested outer space, emerging nations like Brazil prioritize leveraging space for Earth observation, for navigation services, and for climate monitoring for immediate socioeconomic benefits. It's a very different driver focused on direct, tangible impacts on daily life and development.
It's about development needs versus asset protection.
Largely, yes, and this situation is further exacerbated by the growing militarization of space, including the proliferation of dual-use technologies that can serve both civilian and military purposes, like advanced imaging satellites.
Making things even more complex and dangerous.
This trend threatens both security and sustainability for all, but particularly for vulnerable nations. Many emerging nations lack robust protective measures like hardened satellites that can withstand attacks, or comprehensive cyber defenses, making them particularly vulnerable due to their heavy reliance on foreign-controlled services like global navigation satellite systems, or GNSS, and often outdated ground infrastructure for their own domestic applications.
So their critical infrastructure is at risk.
It can be easily disrupted with profound consequences.
So This leads to a pressing question for the international community. How can we ensure that this burgeoning space economy truly benefits all nations, especially those most dependent on space-based technologies for their development and well-being, and not just the wealthiest and most technologically advanced?
That's a huge challenge.
What specific mechanisms are needed to truly amplify the voices and address the specific vulnerabilities of the Global South in space governance? It's about more than just technology or economics. It's about fundamental fairness and inclusive progress for all of humanity.
Addressing these multifaceted ethical and equity concerns necessitates robust, evolving legal frameworks that can genuinely keep pace with the incredibly rapid technological advancements we're witnessing in space. The law, unfortunately, tends to move much slower than innovation.
And when we talk about legal frameworks, we have to start with the cornerstone, the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, or OST.
The bedrock, really.
It serves as the general legal basis for the peaceful uses of outer space, providing a crucial foundational framework that has been widely ratified, with many countries still adhering to its core principles. It was a remarkable achievement for its time, born from a period of intense superpower rivalry.
The OST contains what were, at the time, truly revolutionary principles, reflecting an ambitious, forward-looking vision for humanity's presence in space. It states profoundly that the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, shall be carried out for the benefit and in the interests of all countries, and shall be the province of all mankind.
That province of all mankind phrase again. Very powerful.
It enshrined a principle of shared heritage. It declares space free for exploration and use by all states without discrimination, ensuring universal access, and explicitly states that outer space is not subject to national appropriation by claims of sovereignty.
So no country can claim the moon.
Theoretically, no. Crucially, Article 6 stipulates that states bear international responsibility for national activities in outer space, whether carried on by governmental agencies or by non-governmental entities, and must assure authorization and continuing supervision by the appropriate state party for non-governmental activities.
That seems key for private companies. The home country is responsible.
It is. Article 7 establishes international liability for damage caused by space objects, and Article 9 contains an early environmental principle. States shall conduct activities so as to avoid their harmful contamination and also adverse changes in the environment of the Earth resulting from the introduction of extraterrestrial matter.
So it touched on environmental concerns even back then. These principles truly reflect the initial Cold War ethos of peaceful coexistence and, importantly, preventing an arms race or weaponization in space. Article 4, for example, directly bans nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction in orbit.
A crucial non-weaponization clause.
It was a groundbreaking framework designed for a state-dominated landscape where the primary actors were national governments. In that context, it made immense sense, striving for a cooperative, peaceful frontier.
While foundational and remarkably visionary for its era, the OST's broad language also creates fascinating legal gray areas that are increasingly problematic and insufficient in this new era of private space exploration, which it couldn't possibly have fully anticipated.
The world has changed, but the treaty hasn't kept pace.
The current rapid commercialization is truly testing the limits of its interpretation.
This is where the rubber meets the road, where the idealism of the past clashes with the commercial realities of today. Despite the OST's importance, it clearly lacks specific, detailed language directly addressing private enterprise resource extraction in space.
A huge gap.
This silence creates a vacuum. The reality is that self-interest continues to dominate the usage of the orbital commons, because there is no legally binding commitment to ensure space is free for future generations beyond a simply safe, workable condition. Companies aren't legally bound to preserve resources or environments beyond what ensures their own continued operations.
Indeed. Early space law was shaped by the geopolitical situation of its time, primarily two superpowers. The rapid commercial and institutional shift that has occurred over the last decade has simply not been met with a resultant attitudinal shift or sufficient legal evolution within international bodies.
The mindset hasn't caught up with the technology.
Or the business models. This has led to a lack of a clear value system that could function to guide development in an efficient, ethical way across the board. For instance, the Moon Agreement of 1979 attempted to establish an international regime for exploiting lunar natural resources once feasible, based on the common heritage of mankind principle.
Another attempt to codify that shared benefit idea.
Yes, but it hasn't achieved wide acceptance, partly because its common heritage of mankind principle is viewed by some major stakeholders, like the USA, as akin to international socialism and politically unacceptable.
Why unacceptable? What's the objection?
Well, to unpack that a bit, the common heritage principle suggests that resources in space belong to all of humanity, and their benefits should be shared equitably, often implying a form of international governance or revenue sharing. This clashes directly with the capitalist-driven approach favored by some nations and private entities who argue it stifles innovation and private property rights.
They see it as hindering investment.
Exactly. They view it as a collective ownership model that doesn't fit a free market system or incentivize the massive investments required for, say, asteroid mining.
You see this regulatory gap, this ideological chasm, in action with the widely accepted but crucially non-binding guidelines produced by CUP-US, that's the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, for space debris mitigation.
Right, the guidelines are voluntary.
These guidelines are efficient in design and scientifically sound, but they are entirely voluntary. This means individual actors and companies can pursue their own agendas, only adopting environmental considerations if they don't threaten profit or national interest. There's no real enforcement
These
mechanism.
are good advice, but no teeth.
Pretty much. In response to this void, some countries, like the U.S., with its Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act of 2015, and Luxembourg, with its Space Resources Law of 2017, have proactively created national legal frameworks to support private lunar resource exploitation.
Trying to create legal certainty for their industries.
Yes, this signals growing acceptance of the idea, and certainly attracts space businesses, but it also potentially creates a fragmented patchwork legal landscape rather than a unified international one, which could lead to future conflicts or an unregulated rush, a first-come, first-served scenario maybe.
This brings us to a crucial point. Without a robust, legally binding international framework that transcends narrow national interests and commercial ambitions, is the future of space destined to be a chaotic free-for-all, a sort of Wild West in the cosmos?
That's the fear, isn't it?
And if so, how might that ultimately undermine the very longevity and sustainability of space activities, making it dangerous or unprofitable even for those who initially benefited from the lack of rules? This raises an important question about whether a truly shared vision for our cosmic future is even possible, or if it will simply be dictated by the powerful few.
That's a sobering thought. Recognizing these significant gaps in our current frameworks, what ethical approaches and collaborative pathways can we pursue now to build a more just and sustainable future in space? It truly feels like we're at a pivotal moment where the decisions we make today will shape humanity's trajectory for centuries to come.
It absolutely is. And interestingly, traditional ethical models like utilitarianism, which essentially weigh the maximum benefits against the negative consequences for the greatest number, may be insufficient for a field as nascent as the space-for-space industry.
Why insufficient?
Well, in this truly new frontier, the ideas of right and wrong, particularly concerning extraterrestrial environments or long-term multi-generational settlements, are yet to be clearly defined. It's incredibly difficult to predict all the benefits or consequences accurately enough to make a purely utilitarian calculation seem reliable.
Too many unknowns.
Exactly.
This is where another ethical framework, virtue ethics, offers a promising alternative, shifting the focus. Can you explain that?
Sure. Instead of just maximizing good outcomes or minimizing harm, virtue ethics focuses on the role of character and virtue, emphasizing the ongoing journey to develop virtuous habits.
So it's about the character of the actors, not just the outcome.
Precisely. This framework would encourage private businesses and individuals to prioritize technological processes with a continual goal of improving life on Earth and beyond, fostering adaptability and a deep sense of responsibility towards the dynamic space environment. This stands in stark contrast to the Silicon Valley model, where corporate leaders often prioritize innovation and opportunities for growth above all else, sometimes at the expense of other values.
So it asks, what kind of characters should we embody as we expand into space, not just what can we get?
Exactly. This means consciously cultivating virtues like responsibility, foresight, and long-term stewardship within companies and individuals operating in space. It's about embedding these values into the very culture of space organizations, rather than simply seeking to avoid fines or legal repercussions after the fact.
Building an ethical culture from the inside out.
It's about building an ethical culture from the ground up. One that views space as a shared heritage and responsibility, not just a resource to be exploited or a market to be captured. It's a proactive, rather than reactive, approach to ethics.
And applying these ethical lenses naturally leads to a resounding call for more collaborative governance structures. Because no single entity, no single nation or corporation can possibly manage this alone. The challenges are simply too vast and too interconnected.
That seems clear. The privatization of space is a seemingly inevitable reality that should not be shied away from, given the immense technological progress and cost efficiencies driven by private enterprise. The innovation is undeniable.
We can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Probably not. However, it absolutely requires the right regulations in place, a diverse ethical framework agreed upon by the public and private sectors alike, with enough independence for businesses to find success while still serving the common good. It's a delicate balance, but a necessary one to strike for the long term.
How do we achieve that balance?
Achieving this balance requires an unprecedented level of collaboration of the public and private sectors, government agencies, private enterprises, and technical experts. They truly must come together to set standards that allow for innovation and financial success to coexist with the common good, fostering both progress and responsibility.
Are there concrete proposals for how to do this?
Yes, concrete proposals include negotiating additional optional protocols to the Outer Space Treaty, as suggested by Ambassador Cousineau, to reinforce it incrementally without needing a complete and potentially unachievable renegotiation of the entire treaty.
So add amendments rather than rewrite the whole thing.
Kind of like that, yeah. The concept of legally binding and non-legally binding mechanisms should be seen as complementary, with international guidelines being an important first step in establishing norms, and transparency and confidence-building measures, or PCBMs, being essential for preventing disasters and mitigating risks by fostering trust and clear communication between space actors. Just knowing what everyone else is doing helps.
And the role of the Global South here?
The Global South, as we discussed, plays a vital, indeed indispensable role here. By advocating for differentiated responsibilities, meaning developed nations, with their historical and current large-scale space activities, bear a greater burden of responsibility for sustainability.
Because they've contributed more to the problem historically.
Right. As well as advocating for equitable access and capacity building through initiatives like South-South cooperation and scientific diplomacy. These efforts strengthen their voice in multilateral forums like GRELAC, which is the group of Latin American and Caribbean countries, and the G77, a coalition of developing nations designed to promote collective economic interests and bargaining power.
Giving them a stronger collective voice.
These groups are vital because they give a unified voice to countries that might otherwise be marginalized in these high-stakes discussions. There's a clear need to ensure adequate representation of the Global South in multilateral fora through concerted political will and dedicated resource provision.
It takes resources just to participate effectively.
Absolutely. Furthermore, involving non-governmental entities like the space industry itself, academia, and civil society in discussions and decision-making processes related to space security is crucial for creating new international conventions that are truly comprehensive and reflect the realities of today's diverse space sectors.
Bringing everyone to the table.
Essentially, yes.
What's truly fascinating here, and a point that gives me immense hope, is the explicit mention of the role of youth as critical.
Yeah, that came up too.
They're the ones who will inherit and shape the future of space governance. How can we ensure that the creativity, the idealism, and the optimism of youth are effectively integrated with the deep expertise and seasoned perspectives of policymakers and industry leaders to truly achieve collaboration across generations, across sectors, and across borders?
That's a huge question, but a vital one. It's about mentorship, inclusion, listening to new voices.
It's a huge challenge, but also perhaps the biggest opportunity we have to get this right.
This is not just a high-level policy debate confined to diplomatic chambers. It's about shaping the fundamental values that will guide humanity's future beyond Earth.
It's about our legacy.
It's about recognizing that securing space for everyone requires collective action, a willingness to reconcile competing interests, and an unwavering commitment to sustainability, ensuring that this incredible frontier remains a resource and an inspiration for all, not just a privileged few.
And there you have it. We've embarked on a truly extensive deep dive into the fascinating yet incredibly complex ethical landscape of private space exploration.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We've explored how the undeniable shift from state-led to commercially driven activities presents urgent challenges. From the growing environmental threat of space debris and the crucial need for planetary protection on other worlds, to the bioethical dilemmas surrounding human spaceflight and the critical questions of wealth inequality and equitable access for the Global South. We've also delved into the foundational Outer Space Treaty and its current limitations in this new era, and considered proactive pathways forward through evolving ethical frameworks and unprecedented global collaboration.
Ultimately, the insights from our sources reveal a clear narrative. Our historical approach to space has been deeply shaped by Cold War military goals and a pioneering spirit that often viewed space as a limitless commons ripe for the taking.
A kind of grab-what-you-can mentality sometimes.
This approach, while inspiring in its ambition, has left us with significant challenges as we transition into this commercial era where individual and corporate interests are increasingly paramount.
So, as you reflect on all of this, on the history, the current realities, and the future possibilities, what core values must you champion personally and collectively to ensure humanity's expansion into the cosmos is not a repeat of past terrestrial mistakes?
How do we avoid messing it up again?
How can we ensure it becomes a truly ethical and sustainable endeavor for all? What is the one thing you can do in your sphere of influence to ensure space remains a common heritage for future generations and not just a new arena for unchecked exploitation? Think about that.